I'm Dwayne Brown. Tonight on KPBS Evening Edition, answering the demands for transparency on racial profiling in San Diego. We'll take a closer look at the crime data. It's more than a school carnival, the Lunar New Year party at a school that's leading the way for language programs.
And why are so many K-12 students in San Diego County lagging behind in tech-savvy opportunities? I'm Peggy Pico with a new technology assessment of 766 area schools. But first, demands for back taxes and a proposal for new regulations on short-term and vacation rental homes leads to confusion and a proposal for new regulations.
Also, details tonight behind a plan to expand a North County nuclear plant that's been shut down since 2012. KPBS Evening Edition starts right now. Hi, good evening. Thanks for joining us. The downward trend in San Diego crime rates continued last year. Overall, crime went down nearly 14%, with the largest drop seen in property crime. Violent crime was down nearly 2%. The police department says it's now at a rate comparable to levels in the 1970s. The only significant increase in the numbers last year was for rapes. They were up nearly 20%.
I think there's a lot more education going on. I mean, now, you know, the colleges are addressing the issue. There's a lot of more education going on in, you know, the high schools, middle schools. There's a more education on television. There's a lot more events going on that has brought this to the forefront. So a lot of people are more aware and are more willing to come forward.
San Diego police also reported a higher success rate in closing rape cases. Chief Shelley Zimmerman also presented a new batch of racial profiling data today. Speak City Heights reporter Megan Burke says it's the second round since neighbors called for more transparency early last year. She joins us now with more on the report. Megan, how does the police department measure racial profiling?
Well, it attempts to measure racial profiling by recording the race of individuals officers pull over and then comparing that with the overall demographics of people on the road. Now, I say attempts because this data leaves out a lot of variables: population shifts, crime rates, and heavy police presence in historically black neighborhoods. Both the police department and criminal justice experts say it isn't enough to prove racial profiling happens, but it certainly can start a conversation.
Okay, so what limited information can this give us?
Well, the data hasn't varied much since the last round in May. Between January and December, officers pulled over black and Hispanic drivers at rates higher than their share of the driving population. Asian and white drivers were pulled over less often. Now, the biggest disparity was among black drivers. They accounted for 11% of the stops and make up less than 6% of the population. And that's true for every San Diego police division except the Mid-City division, which covers City Heights. Now, that gap has narrowed slightly, about 1 percentage point since the last report.
And what has the response been to this data?
Well, several public speakers said regardless of how limited the data is, there are enough red flags to take it seriously. And they provided a lot of anecdotal instances in which they felt harassed by police because of the color of their skin. Chief Zimmerman says her department does not teach or condone racial profiling and has actually started a new class to help recruits understand their own bias.
So what happens next?
Well, Councilwoman Marty Emerald has ordered an independent review of the data by San Diego State's School of Public Affairs. She'll have more information on that at next month's public safety meeting.
KPBS reporter Megan Burks. We are learning more about a massive data breach of health insurance giant Anthem. 13 million Californians were affected. Hackers may have stolen personal information from current and former customers dating back to 2004. The company offered them free identity theft protection and credit monitoring. Anthem is California's largest for-profit health insurer. It's an unusual deal made between Southwest Airlines and the FAA. The airline grounded about 1/5 of its fleet after workers discovered they missed inspections. In a statement, the low-cost carrier said it voluntarily removed the affected aircraft from service yesterday, initiated maintenance checks, and disclosed the matter to the FAA. Southwest also developed an action plan to complete all overdue checks. The agency, meanwhile, allowed Southwest to keep the aircraft flying for 5 days while inspections are completed between routes. Southern California Edison wants state permission to expand its storage capacity at the shuttered San Onofre plant in the North County. The nuclear plant hasn't operated since 2012 after leaks were discovered in its steam generators. The utility later decided to retire the 2 reactors. Edison hopes to move all the remaining spent fuel from storage ponds into concrete and steel canisters by 2019. Coastal Commission will likely hold hearings on the request. Supreme Court has declined to hear a challenge to a controversial stem cell patent. KPBS science reporter David Wagner spoke with a San Diego researcher who's been fighting the patent for nearly a decade.
Jean Loring is a stem cell researcher at the Scripps Research Institute in La Jolla. She says a broad patent on human embryonic stem cells is stifling research and development. The Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation holds the patent and collects fees from scientists working with these kinds of cells. Loring says the patent should be revoked because it covers naturally occurring material.
You can't patent air, you can't patent water, and you shouldn't be able to patent embryonic stem cells because all of those are products of nature.
In 2013, the Supreme Court used that logic to overturn a patent covering a breast cancer gene. But in declining to hear this case, the court has allowed the stem cell patent to stand. David Wagner, KPBS News.
Vacation homes and room rentals through internet sites like Airbnb are popular in San Diego. Recently, the city demanded hosts pay back taxes and penalty fees. Now some council members want new rules to govern short-term rentals. Peggy Pico takes a closer look at the issue.
The city of San Diego recently sent out 252 letters demanding payments from people who rented their rooms or homes out through Airbnb and other internet host sites. Confusion ensued because the city does not have clear rules about short-term vacation rentals. My guest, Omar Passons, a former Airbnb host, and City Councilman Chris Cate, who's proposing new regulations for hosts, are here with further details. And Omar, you've been an Airbnb host. You're currently staying in an Airbnb apartment. How does this site and others like it work?
Well, it's pretty straightforward, actually. You go on your website, either on your computer or a phone, and you just have an opportunity to look for places by city, and then you can sort of gauge the people who you either rent to if they're going to come stay with you or where you're going to go. And there's reviews listed, sort of like Yelp, to help people really understand who they're renting out to or who's staying in their home. So
sort of short-term rental vacation type of things, but using your own home or your own condo.
Well, I think it's important to realize people do it. I'm doing it right now here in San Diego because our house is getting renovated. So corporate short-term, all sorts of other
things
uses.
Like that.
Yeah.
Now, Chris, right now, how does the city of San Diego actually regulate short-term rentals like this?
It's unclear, and that's some of the reasons why we went forward with our proposals, because when we got word from our constituents about receiving one of these letters, we looked further into the municipal code and saw just a lot of ambiguity, a lot of just clumsiness in terms of the writing, because these codes haven't been updated in 40, 50 years. And so it's really unclear for folks what rules they have to follow in order to rent out their home for a short period of time, and that's why we went forward with our proposal. Are
there certain neighborhoods where rentals like these can't operate?
Right now, no. I mean, you have to go through either permitting phases, or it's unclear,
like
zoning issues exactly. So no one knows really the rules of the road, and that's what we went forward and tried to list out what are some simple steps that you would have to take in order to operate. And if someone wanted to rent out their home, they can receive a packet that says these are some of the issues that you have to be concerned with, these are the things you have to follow in order to participate.
And Omar, you're representing a woman right now who's in a legal battle with the city over her rental issues or rental units. Tell us about that.
Right. So I'm a land use attorney, and a friend reached out and said, hey, there's somebody that's really facing a tough situation. And the bottom line is she rented out rooms using Airbnb on a short-term basis and was there and was able to make sure people were behaving. And as a result of some sort of neighbor complaints to code enforcement, neighbors sort of pushing the council office in that area, she is facing now up to $250,000 in fines from the city of San Diego.
We're not going to talk about that, Chris, right at the moment because it isn't in litigation right now. But you and Councilwoman Lori Zapp are working on creating new mandates, as you mentioned, to regulate these short-term rentals that include a new tax structure and a new fee structure. What are the specifics of your proposal?
So my proposal is about threefold. Essentially, the first is that we want to make sure we define what a short-term rental property is that it's anybody who rents out their home for a period of 30 days or less. The second thing is more of a public input, be a neighborly section of the ordinance, which would be that if you do rent out your home during that period of time, whether it's your room or your house, is that you have a local 24-hour day, 7-day-a-week contact in which someone, if there is a disturbance, there is a nuisance that occur, can call that local contact, and that person would have to respond within 60 minutes to whatever that complaint is. And lastly, if there are a series of nuisances that are documented nuisances that continue to occur, that there be fines and penalties associated with that. So we want to make sure that we're entrusting that there are some private property rights that occur for people who are homeowners, that they're allowed to do this. But we also want to make sure that there's that balance of a quality of life standpoint, that there are good folks who are making sure they're following the rules, but for those bad apples, that there are fines and penalties associated.
Sure. And Omar, how would you like to see concerns about noise issues or large groups of people coming in and out on a regular basis in neighborhoods? How would you like to see that handled?
Well, I think it's important that there be that responsible hosts, and I'm affiliated with the Short-Term Rental Alliance in terms of here locally, who wants responsible hosts to be able to do it, and for people who misbehave in some of the beach communities and elsewhere to have stiff penalties to prevent them. And it's also important that council offices have an actual stated policy for how they decide to intervene in neighbor disputes, because part of these issues is about how things get elevated from council offices into the code enforcement.
All right, Omar Passons and Councilman Chris Cate, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
San Diego attorney Corey Briggs published an open letter today on his firm's website responding to stories investigating his business practices. Those stories, reported by KPBS media partner iNewsSource, also detailed potential conflicts of interest between Briggs and his wife. KPBS published the stories online and aired them on radio and television. In the letter, Briggs explained his practice of entering into deeds of trust with his clients and wrote that they, quote, take measures to avoid creating any conflicts between him and his wife's work. The full letter is available at kpbs.org. A welcome homecoming for the crew of the USS San Diego after its maiden voyage. The amphibious transport ship was joined by 2 other vessels on a 7-month deployment to the Western Pacific and Middle East, where its crew helped with airstrikes against Islamic State targets. The namesake San Diego was officially commissioned in 2012. Even though San Diego is a major high-tech hub, a new report finds local schools aren't producing as many tech-savvy students. Peggy Pico finds out why.
University of San Diego researchers did a technology needs assessment of 766 schools in 38 of the county's school districts. Here to talk about the lackluster results and what can be done about it are my guests, Scott Himmelstein, director of USD's Mobile Technology Learning Center, and Emil Ahangarzadeh, director of Digital Solutions at the County Office of Education. And Scott, what are some of the key findings of this report?
Well, as you said, we surveyed 42 school districts, all of our school districts in the county, and asked them questions. How many devices do you have? What kind of training do you give to your teachers? What kind of access to the broadband do you have? So in general, we found that only 9% of our high school students in the county and 11% of our middle school students in the county have full-time access to a device used for educational purposes. So
when you're talking about this full-time access to this device, to clarify that a little bit, because lots of kids have smartphones. That doesn't count.
Right, it doesn't. And the high school numbers are counterintuitive because all the kids have smartphones. We're talking about a device that is either issued by the school district or brought to the school by the student, used for an educational purpose, where the kid has access to the internet both in the classroom and at home.
So like an iPad or a laptop
Chromebook,
or something
yes.
like that.
Mm-hmm.
Emil, how is smart technology being used in the classroom right now today?
Mostly it's being used by teachers to do the teaching, and I think it's been quite successful. I think the shift that's necessary over the course of the coming years is for us to be able to use more of the technology for the learning process. So that has to do with students actually using the technologies to engage in their environment, engage their content, to be able to produce content.
So the issue of being with the students rather than with the teachers. Now, Scott, what do the school districts tell you about other issues, including infrastructure and bandwidth needs? It's not just about mobile devices.
Right. So we asked them, what are your greatest challenges in implementing technology? And almost 60% of our districts said aging infrastructure and access to bandwidth was the biggest problem. So we know in our county we have many schools that are 30 to 40 years old. They simply do not have the pipes built to carry the access for broadband, and some of the schools are less than up to par in terms of doing that.
And we also see on this graphic here from your report that professional development, 47% of the schools, Emil said that the teacher training, they want professional development on this. What kind of training is already in place for these teachers, and what do they need?
Well, they're getting a lot of training on how to use devices, and they're getting training on how to use different products that they're bringing into the system. What they need more of is training on digital literacies and being able to teach our students how to be responsible citizens and teach them advanced and academic ways to conduct academic research as opposed to simply be able to access the content itself. So we're seeing more and more of a shift being made in the professional development programs within our school districts towards being able to teach our teachers how to actually provide educational experiences for these kids as opposed to just using the devices to convey the information.
Sure, certainly. Now, as Scott said, infrastructure and bandwidth needs, those are very costly things to rewire an old school building, let's say. Professional development, also costly, and trying to get mobile devices for each student. Any creative funding suggestions for how to do that and pay for that?
I can tell you the government is starting to step up a little bit. Most recently in January, the State Department, California government put out approximately $26 million or $27 million for something called the BIG grant. This is the Broadband Infrastructure Improvement grant that was given out to school districts to be able to improve some of the infrastructure. The problem is that only 4 school districts within our county was able to access that. So funding is a big challenge.
All right, more to talk on that later, I'm sure. Scott, how would you like to see this report, which addresses very specific issues, the first of its kind report? How would you like to see it used?
Well, as we see, the report indicates we've got a lot of work to do. We've got to improve in this area, but we can't get there unless we know where we are. So this is really a starting point for some dialogue between our education leaders, our corporate leaders, philanthropic leaders, and political leaders to say, how do we thoughtfully come up with a good strategic approach to this, which includes issues like funding, as you brought up.
All right, well, everyone can read this very interesting report actually on our website, kpbs.org. Scott Hemmelston and Emil Garzadeh, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
When school districts need a lot of dough to upgrade an aging school or build a new one, they often turn to bonds because they're relatively safe and easy. But as our media partner iNewsSource found out, they can sometimes be unexpectedly expensive for taxpayers. Reporters Joanne Farian and Leo Castaneda explain.
It's not unusual for school districts across the county to borrow money when they want to build a new school. In many cases, they go to the bond market to raise the cash. iNewsSource has been looking into how much these bonds actually cost taxpayers, and it's more than you think. iNewsSource reporter Leo Castaneda joins me now to tell us what he's learned. Leo?
Like you said, bonds are a pretty common way for school districts to pay for big projects. They're not a particularly scary or risky move for districts trying to build new schools or modernize aging ones. They work a lot like mortgages. I enlisted the help of 2 of my friends, Spencer and Sander Andersons, they're 4th graders, to help school us on bonds.
School Bonds 101. A crash course in school finance. iNewsSource. Buildings are a big part of running a school district. Growing districts need new schools and classrooms, and older schools need to be renovated. Classroom tools need upgrading, like new computers.
You've got mail.
Whiteboards. And science equipment. And eventually that has to be replaced. That costs money. Lots of money. So school districts turn to bonds. Bonds work a lot like loans. They have a starting principal and an interest rate. All sorts of investors buy school bonds, such as banks and hedge funds, private investors, and maybe even you, if you have something like a 401k. Every year, districts pay back some of the principal plus interest. After 20 or 25 years of these payments, the district pays off the bond. That money comes from taxpayers like you.
So, Leo, what's the problem with using bonds to borrow money?
It all comes down to the type of bonds that districts use. Remember all the hoopla over Poway Unified School District's capital appreciation bond?
Yeah, that was a so-called billion-dollar bond.
Well, it turns out that districts all over California and San Diego County have issued those bonds. Some of them are even more expensive than Poway's.
How are these bonds different than regular bonds? What makes them so expensive?
Basically, they allow school districts to put off paying their debts for years and years and years. My two friends, Spencer and Sander, they'll be middle-aged men by the time some of these bonds are paid off.
Now, I know you looked at a specific example of a capital appreciation bond. You looked at one in the San Ysidro School District that was issued in 2011. Now, with that bond, the district got about $16 million. They used it to pay in part for a new K-3 elementary school called Vista Del Mar. That school opened in 2012.
Now, let's imagine an 8-year-old third grader. We'll call her Susie. She attends Vista Del Mar today. Because of the way capital appreciation bonds work, districts don't have to make any principal or interest payments for years, sometimes even decades. So Susie can graduate elementary school, go to high school, graduate from college. She could even have a kid and the district still won't have made a single payment on the bond. San Ysidro won't make the first payment until Susie is a 34-year-old mother with a 9-year-old in 4th grade. But that's not where Susie's story ends. The districts will keep making payments of this bond for 9 years until Susie's kid is a college freshman.
So really, in other words, the district gets to borrow now and pay later, way later.
That's right. And all that time that the district isn't making any payments, the bond isn't just sitting back and enjoying San Diego's weather. It's growing. By the time the bill comes due in 2050, San Ysidro residents will have to pay back about $229 million for that $16 million bond.
That's a debt ratio of almost $15 for every dollar borrowed.
Yeah, and that's not even the worst capital appreciation bond in San Diego County. Santee School District issued a bond with a debt ratio of almost 17-to-1. And here's the kicker. These bonds are like a very slow ticking time bomb. Once the time comes, it'll blow up into this massive debt, and residents are left with a decades-old building in need of the same kinds of upgrades that bond was supposed to pay for in the first place.
We know Poway used these bonds, Santee and San Ysidro use these bonds, but they're not the only ones, are they?
Far from it. More than 300 school districts in California issued these bonds, along with 19 in San Diego County alone. Of course, not all of them carry the high debt ratios we're talking about here.
Okay, Leo, if these bonds are such bad news, why use them at all?
Well, back around 2008, districts found themselves under mounting pressure to build stuff right around the same time that the economy was tanking. Some of those districts turned to capital appreciation bonds, and that's when things took a turn for the worse. Since then, a law has passed to prevent districts from issuing more of the most expensive capital appreciation bonds, but the districts that already issued them are often stuck with them for decades.
Leo, you've got a searchable database so the people at home can find out whether their school district used a capital appreciation bond. Where do they find that database?
They can find it at inewssource.org.
The Lunar New Year celebration isn't over in Pacific Beach. KPBS reporter Matt Bowler shows us the celebration at a very special school.
From the outside, it looks like any other school carnival. Kids sing adorably off-key and smiling parents snap pictures. Until you listen to the kids. They're singing in Chinese. This is Barnard Pacific Language Academy, a Chinese language immersion school.
One of the first Mandarin immersion dual language program in San Diego Unified School District.
That's Principal Eddie Park. Every year for the past 7 years, the school has thrown a Lunar New Year party. It started small,
with maybe about 20 people or so, and has grown into a major celebration and event.
Parents in droves. Jonathan Jesnek says he's amazed at the pace his son is learning Chinese.
More surprising how fast it's been developing than I would anticipate.
For Jesnek, the school is a door opener for his son.
The Chinese language, with him understanding that plus English, he can speak to almost 90% of the world.
Third grader Anna has her own reasons for learning Chinese.
Because my mom doesn't know Chinese. Sometimes we test her and she doesn't know what it means.
Jesnek says he understands where Anna's parents are coming from. He's got some studying of his own to do.
I mean, in the future that I need to catch up or get to speed so I know what they're talking about.
And after their big moment, these kids, like any other kids, mug for the camera and want to say just one thing.
Ni hao, San Diego!
Matt Bowler, KPBS News.
How cute. You can find tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org/evening edition. Thanks for joining us. You have a great night.